to drive ROI, right? Compensation, says the HR partner. Let us talk about compensation. I like talking about my own compensation. So do you want to kick us off? This is Matt Apple, one of the partners at Amplio.
Appreciate everybody coming out today. We're excited to have this little breakout session. Of course, why didn't we put your name on the slide? Oh, okay.
We should put it on, for sure.
Well, we have Joe Grover here asking the critical questions, and Rachel here answering them to the best of her ability. So we appreciate your time here with us. At the end, we'll have probably 10 minutes of Q&A. So let's go to there. Appreciate it.
I'm going to ask questions back at Joe, too. So we'll make it exciting here.
It's amazing. So like Rachel's one of the most brilliant marketers I've had the joy of rubbing shoulders with. We had a mastermind group a few years back when Rachel was the CMO at Chatbooks, which grew uber quickly, right? Super fast.
Yeah, we had some triple growth years in there. So those are fast ones.
And so we sat down right in this mastermind, and I was at Homey as the CMO, and I think Alex MacArthur from Purple was there. And so we had these amazing consumer-focused marketing leaders, and we would just talk shop. And Rachel always had just such an amazing perspective on how to drive creative marketing, but also how to ensure all of that marketing was really driving positive ROI for the companies where she led marketing. She's now a entrepreneur/executive in residence at Peterson Ventures. What does that mean? You want to tell us what your work entails there?
Yeah, so after being in the trenches of marketing world on an exec team for many, many years, now I am sitting in-house at a venture capital firm that funds early stage startups and then helps grow them to much, much later stage, and working with those executive teams on driving growth and how do they look at that, and then also evaluating deals and choosing what we invest in. And a lot of that comes from what I needed as a marketer and somebody looking to drive revenue. And so I look at a lot of software and deals that support marketing and growth across business channels.
And I thought there's no better person to speak to this topic of how CFOs and the rest of the executive suite can interface with marketing leaders to drive more growth in businesses, because now she's sitting in a pseudo finance function, right? But is a marketer at her core. So let's just talk about the CFO and the CMO dynamic. How many CFOs do we have in the room? Finance?
Good.
Anyone in
Yeah.
finance? Do we have other executives, founders, CEOs? Okay. How many, maybe you won't answer this question. How many of you trust your marketing department or your marketing leader? Okay, good. There you go. Thank you. We're fractional. This is one of our clients. So thank you. Where's Courtney? She's right there. Yeah, it's interesting as they surveyed executive leadership. They found that 70 to 80% of CEOs trust their CFOs and their CIOs, but only 20 to 30% trusted their CMOs. Why do you think that is, Rachel?
I love that you started us there, Joe, sitting here in my marketing seat. It's a good question. I think historically, marketing traditionally owned what I would call creative and storytelling and finding the best story, which a lot of times is what you want with a customer audience, whether that customer is a business or a consumer buying for their own lives. I do think, and what is trying to happen in general, is marketers are owning their metrics much more, and we'll dive a ton into how to think about metrics and what that looks like, and metrics you can collaborate on. But I think in general, stories are easier to poke holes in and question, and sometimes end up topsy-turvy, versus metrics, which, as they say, lies in statistics. But if you pick the right metrics, they don't lie, right? And I think that's something we'll want to talk about as well, is what metrics don't lie. So that would be my first take on why that is a hard job. I think another kind of hot take is probably traditionally CFOs and many kind of CEOs come through similar programs of MBA program or accounting or finance. Like, there has traditionally been a lot of overlap in that education path. And so those groups tend to speak in the same language, whether that's using the same type of deck to present something or looking at financial spreadsheets in the same way. And so something I really encourage marketers to do in general is learn to speak that language. And if you can speak that language and get on the same page with everybody else on the executive team, it makes those conversations easier and I think would build trust at the same time. I learned how to speak in slides when I became an executive team member, I say. And now I just ghost deck out everything in slides first. But if you can speak in slides, you can interact with the team a lot better.
Do you have an example you want to share, maybe at Chatbooks or elsewhere, where you were collaborating really effectively with the CFO or the rest of the executive team to drive growth?
So I'm going to give everybody here a stat too. You get to start with the non-trust one, but I was in a conversation a number of years ago with kind of a recruiting firm that just recruited for CMO jobs, Chief Marketing Officer jobs, and they placed those CMOs at most of the Fortune 500 companies. That was really their bread and butter, Fortune 500 CMOs. And they had experienced a lot of turnover in that role that they were placing. They would have short tenure. People would be in a job for 12 months, 24 months. I think the average tenure at the time, I'm sure it's similar days, 23 months in a role, which is pretty short. And it was by far the shortest tenure of any executive team role. So long story short, these CMOs were getting placed and they were not staying. And that doesn't look great for the recruiters. So they set down to figure out what makes a great CMO that has a long-lasting tenure. And one of the things they did was they got a whole cross-section of calendars, work calendars, to see where are people spending their time. And of course, it's not a perfect view into your life, but it gives them a bit of where do people spend time, who do they meet with. And the anecdote struck me as they said, of all that data we had, which is a lot of data, there was only one thing that really stood out, is long-tenured CMOs meet very, very regularly with the CFOs. They meet something like 3 to 4x more time with the CFOs than the shortest tenured CMOs. And at that time, I would have said, I have a good relationship with our CFO. I'm chatting with him regularly. We're sending things back and forth a lot. We're in our executive team member. And I went back from that conference and I said, hey, we are going to have a weekly meeting. Let's get it on the calendar. And we started doing that. And I've continued that ever since, is that finance is probably the closest and most regular relationship that a marketer can have. I think there are important relationships with functions like product and HR, but I would say finance is the one. And I would say it is because ultimately you're trying to drive revenue and you're trying to drive ROI. And your CFO is also managing cash flow and bank covenants and funding and every dollar, right? And so what you both do affect each other so much. You're both kind of managing different parts of that dollar's life cycle through your company. So I would say, doing that. There's my story to set that up, but how does it drive growth? So talking about some of these triple growth years, double growth years, where what was true 12 months ago has to be totally different 12 months in the future to grow that quickly. And things are just changing. You're bringing in large numbers of customers very quickly, often without time to kind of watch them behave and mature and know exactly how it's going to shake out. And you're also probably putting a lot of cash up front that eventually you need to get back in your kind of coffers and know what's happening there. And so because of that, having a really ongoing relationship of sometimes many times a day, right? We're rerunning the numbers. We're getting this number in on our customer acquisition today. Can you pull that through the model? If this trend continues, where does that leave us end of month? If this trend continues, what does that mean for our bank covenants? And so there's a lot of putting in your latest and letting them run through. And if everybody's on the same page, it's one of those things where if you know early, you can pull back and change things or lean into something, right? Sometimes those trends are great trends. Something's looking really well. And it's saying, hey, make hay while the sun is shining. Can we lean into this? What does that do to our cash position? What can we play with here? And so that's where I would say, especially during things like high growth, having that strong financial knowledge and ability to pivot quickly is what can drive things.
Can we just double click on what are some of these hardened metrics Like when we
Yeah.
think about like, can we just get tactical? Like I hope that you guys all walk away with a tool set, maybe a few questions that you'll ask your CMO differently now. But what are some of those hardened metrics, even shared KPIs between finance and marketing?
Yeah. Let me talk through metrics, and I will try to explain what they all are. So one I'll use a lot is CAC, which is just shorthand for customer acquisition cost. And there are a few different flavors of that phrase in different industries. So you may want to talk to your team and be like, which exact one are we using? Sometimes you'll hear something like ROAS, which is similar. But the general idea there is, what did it cost to acquire a customer? And if you want to get really in the weeds, you can actually break that down to what does it cost across all of our channels, or what does it cost on any individual channel? And a CMO should know on any individual channel, and probably actually 2 levels deeper than that, what it costs, because they're comparing all their different options of where to deploy resources. But CAC is one of those ones that you just walk in the door and what does it cost? But CAC on its own does not tell you a whole lot, unless you kind of make decisions on a margin. And so I want to I wish I had a whiteboard here, but we're going to try to do it visually here. So CAC number right here, what does it cost to acquire a customer? But what else goes into that, right? It's like, oh, one customer on the margin. What did it cost to produce that creative ad? What does it cost to have your whole team working to be out there to acquire the customer? And again, for a B2B, you're also going to kind of break this into a sales and a marketing motion, but I would blend it together as kind of a way of getting to a North Star metric that you cannot break apart as easily. And so it's really, what does it cost all in to acquire a customer? So let's say your fully loaded sales and marketing budget for a month is $100,000. And you acquire 100,000 customers. You would say kind of your fully loaded CAC or your all-in CAC is $1. And so great. I mean, that's great. If you ever get that, just keep on running. But let's say it's $1. But even on its own, that does not tell you everything, right? Because how much does it cost you to service this customer and give them your product, right? And so then it's like, well, if I got them for $1, but they only spend 1 penny per month, or let's say they spend 2 pennies per month, right? But my gross margins are 50%. So what I net from that customer is 1 penny per month. Now I'm making a bad example here. It's going to take me 100 months to pay back that customer. And at the end of the day, that's what I would call CAC payback, which is the whole entire cost it takes to get a customer on this side. And then how much money do I actually get back? Not revenue. It's what do I get in my pocket after the marginal costs for that customer have been paid for. So for the example at Chatbooks, I get the customer in the door, they give me $10, but I have to spend 5 of those dollars printing their photo book. And so at the end of the day, I have $5 left in my pocket. And so if I paid $40 for that customer all in, it takes me 8 months to get all that money that I outlaid to acquire that customer back in the door. And if I were to leave you with one number today, it's that CAC payback, or some variation of that works for your business. Because over the years, I found that's the hardest number to tweak and showcase in a different light. Joe and I were saying earlier, no vanity metrics among exec team members. It's the hardest one to turn into a vanity number, right? And at the end of the day, many people across the exec team will own pieces of that, right? Like operations goes into that gross margin number. If you can make your product more cheaply, that helps on your CAC payback. That's a lever to pull. Pricing matters there, right? If your customers pay you more, that's a lever to pull to help those gross margins. If you can acquire a customer for more cheaply, whether that's because you have a smaller sales and marketing team, or you make your creative more cheaply, or you can just go acquire them at the source more cheaply, all of those help your CAC payback. But that's ultimately what I'm looking for. So if I was looking at one number, say in a board meeting, we would start with CAC payback by various cohorts and say how each cohort was tracking on that. Very long answer there.
That was great. Does everyone do that already? Is this new material, or is this how you're already managing?
What was the acronym you used for that?
CAC payback.
CAC payback.
CAC, CAC, customer acquisition cost.
Yeah, kind of an acronym, capital CAC.
You know, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about this. I think the holy grail for marketing is when you get to the channel level CAC, right? And you're evaluating which channels are driving growth efficiently. This is so hard, right? And CEOs and CFOs and CMOs are all trying to figure out, how do I fund more of what's working and driving efficient growth, and how do I stop all of, you know, the other 50% of spend that seems to be just like we're lighting it on fire. It looks great, but it doesn't drive customer acquisition. We didn't have this as one of the questions, but you and I have talked a lot about attribution. Like, full funnel attribution is the holy grail for a marketing leader, and it should be the holy grail for a CFO too. Question is, how do we tackle attribution across channels? Because we have online and offline. I mean, this is like, we could spend the next hour on this, but if we solved for it, none of us would be here, because this is the problem to solve.
Okay, we could spend the next hour, but actually, mic drop. I'm going to do this in 60 seconds because I have a strong opinion on this one. After spending many millions of dollars and working through all the attribution strategies, the thing I have found that gave us the most clarity into what was really working, and by that I mean if it told us something was working and we put more money or more resources into that channel, it continued to work. What it said worked, and that is something, a post-purchase survey, which is incredibly old-fashioned. It means asking someone, how did you hear about us? And giving them a couple options and a blank little line to write it in. And over all the things I have done, including very sophisticated tracking, which is great too. You shouldn't not do that. But if you ask me, and I'll tell you what I looked at first and foremost every day, it was the results of that post-purchase survey. In some ways, because it also tells you what people think influenced them, which is at the end of the day what I really cared about. A lot of other things could take credit, but I cared what they thought influenced them.
I love this. That was really an easy answer. But I remember when I was sitting down with Rachel and Alex, and we were talking about post-purchase. And so over 5 years at Homey, every cohort, we would send out these post-purchase surveys. We would incentivize our customers to fill that out. And we could ask a battery of questions outside of just how you heard about Homey. And we use that actually as really critical input to an attribution model that our finance team built with marketing. And that was a really important input. And people would say, oh, no, they learned about us through, you know, PR, right? And I'm like, well, if they don't remember the news article and they don't remember the KSL article, then I can't really give credit for it, even if the system's telling me yes.
Well, and building on that, something that I found fascinating about the post-purchase surveys is it lets you keep an eye on all these channels that may be fairly small or seem like they don't drive a lot of stuff because you can't track it as easily. And yet when it comes through on the post-purchase survey and you look at the cost that goes into that channel, and what made me think of this was PR, because for the longest time we would do PR, we paid an agency $15,000 a month, you see some articles, it doesn't really seem like it's doing anything though. And I remember the first time we ran that survey and I laid it all out by cost per channel and the number coming through. And PR was not that many, but compared to what we spent on that channel, it was my best per channel CAC. And I literally, pulled this up and showed it to everybody. I had a box like, whoa, look at this, which kind of meant don't turn off that $15,000 a month. At the end of the day, that's a very cost-effective channel. And I think that's what it lets you have those conversations with data instead of, I think PR is important and it's working. And so the more you can just get some data, it helps guide all these discussions.
Just one more point on the post-purchase. The other thing that it allowed us to do, thanks to Rachel for recommending this at Homey, is it allowed us to see not just the first touch point, how they first found out about Homey, or the last touch point, why, maybe that last click on an ad or social media post, but all of those other touch points in between, right? We know that it takes, 7, 8 plus touch points with a consumer before they're going to trust you. Like, what about if I have 1 and 8? What about 2 through 7? And so I started to shape a little bit more of the customer journey and say, okay, maybe I don't have really hardened attribution from my online system around PR, but I sure see it coming through in what my customers are telling me.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I love that post-purchase survey. Okay, one more on it, because I think as you kind of lay that groundwork, and if you want to play more with it, and again, when you have large data sets and large numbers of customers moving through, you can kind of start to see what else is happening. But sometimes we would kind of do a double click, to your point, go in deeper. And so let's say they said, oh, I heard about it word of mouth. Somebody told me about it. Then you go, oh, for 3 weeks, I want to ask who told you about it. And if we can even get their name, and then you can see which customers are driving referrals or which type of customer. I mean, just an anecdote, we realized that the number one type of customer that people were writing in when they said, how did you hear about our photo books? People would say, my daughter. And then we realized, wow, we are talking to a lot of grandmas out here because they are typing this in for us, right? And that gives us a whole strategy and a new audience to go after and a new way to thinking about it. But it came from the data that we were able to access. And so then when I go to the executive team and say, hey, I think we should have a strategy around marketing to grandparents specifically, and here's what it would look like, it's all just grounded in what our customers are actually telling us.
And not to this is a cautionary note too.
Yeah.
You also need to ensure that just because billboards, for example, drove all the awareness for Homey, you don't just buy more billboards, right? It's easy to also get over focused on a channel and say, well, oh, that's what the data is. So why not put $100,000 into one channel, because that's what's driving it. And we forget that this is, I think Courtney talked about this. This is not like a coin-operated machine where we put the 50 cents in the machine. Does it cost 50 cents for a Diet Coke still? That's how old I am. Put $1 into a machine and get a Diet Coke.
$2. You know what? I think that segues us a little bit to how do you think about your marketing dollars and where they're going? And I really, over the years, like to think about business as usual, which is what is working well today, which in your case would be billboards. They're working, they're showing up, we like the cost, it looks like a good CAC payback on billboards. And for a high growth company, I found I wanted about 70% of my resources total to go to business as usual, BAU world, and set 30% to go to experimental. And being really clear on which channels or campaigns or activations or initiatives were which was important for us, because BAU had certain KPIs we were trying to hit, certain CAC targets, certain costs, kind of lived in its, go out, hit the metrics, do exactly what you need to do here. And it was forecast in for the annual forecast and monthly, quarterly forecast at hitting those targets. But then experimental had much higher range. If I was shooting for a $50 CAC over here on BAU, I had a $100 CAC over here on experimental. And the reason we invested so heavily in experimental is because the world changes and things may work but then stop working, or new better things become available. And as soon as something in experimental started to work, showed that it could kind of meet the BAU, slot it right into BAU. And that meant your BAU is constantly getting refreshed as well. But it also really cut out a piece of friction of somebody on the executive team, like a CFO, saying, hey, I see you're doing all these things. Some of them are working, some of them are not, some of them you're hitting metrics, some are horrible. And by the way, why are you throwing a party over there that cost all this money, and what does it do for us? Instead, it was just like, oh, yep, you're hitting BAU, great. We've already allocated for this higher amount over here to know and what it's for. And eventually everybody gets really on board with, oh, it's experimental, great. And you see experimental winners come in and everybody can get on board with that. Yeah. It stands for business as usual. It's just kind of a way of saying these are your kind of everyday channels or tactics that are working, and you generally start to know what they're going to cost you to acquire a customer, how they behave. Yeah. I just called it experimental. But yeah, I use a 70-30, and I think I would say find the right mix for your business. It's more that everybody's on board with the mix, and then you can operate against the mix.
70 for BAU and 30 for
Yeah. So it's kind of like most of your budget goes to the things that you generally know are going to perform.
What
But
if
some is
the
experimental.
experimental is 0? Like, what's your hit rate on your experiments?
So
This is
kind
the
of like in
truth.
venture capital, you only need a couple to make it all worthwhile, and couple wins. Not that great, but some that were. And I think that's what I would say, maybe 2 in 10 as a rough estimate. And to give a real life example, sometimes you also will keep trying an experimental for quite a while. And that may be because you think it should work and it's not. You want to go try a different way, different message. An example for us was with TikTok. It was a very emerging and then popular social media app. We tried, really got bad results. Okay, let's pull back. Tried again 6 months later. Yep, not really working. Tried again the third time, just like they say it was the charm. But TikTok, all of a sudden, we had great metrics. We quickly moved it over to the BAU budget, started pouring money on it, and it was a big hit for us for about 12 months after that. So I would say, though, you have to get pretty clear with a lot of it not working. Or I would say it's not that they fall to zero. It's just that they're not going to go into BAU territory. And so by kind of saying up front that our bar for these channels is lower, I guess, but it can cost us more, then you just have to hit that bar collectively on any given time period for all your experimental for it to be okay. And I would say you have some that are horrible, some that are okay, some that are winners, and in the mix, it would equal out.
What's the crazy? Okay, so this is not for the CFOs, but you'll find it interesting. What's the craziest experiment that you tried, even if it didn't work? What's the one thing that you thought was the most daring?
Oh gosh, well, I've already said make hay while the sun is shining today, so I hate to say it twice, but a lot of finding new channels is getting there first and capturing consumer attention in a new way before it gets crowded, right? And that opportunity may be a week, a month, a year, you never quite know, but over the years, that's definitely been a successful strategy is get there first, which makes you try a lot of weird things to try to be first. But I'll tell you something that, are we being recorded?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to say no
Okay,
so that
I'm
we can hear
gonna-
the story, and then
okay,
I'll
well-
make sure we cut this out in post.
Okay. Well, I'll leave out all names. So I actually at every board meeting I'd always say, anybody hear anything interesting, like anything new? And somebody said, you know what? I heard Cameo might be getting into business stuff, and Cameo is a place where celebrities can record little vignettes. And it was generally very popular during the pandemic, where a C-list celebrity would say "Happy birthday" to your dad. And so I heard that, and I was like, whoa, went on their website, found a little email, sent this woman an email. She said, yeah, you're a second person in the door. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to take a celebrity talking about my product and then take that video and add some words on top of it to kind of make it make sense and put it and run it on ads on all these other social platforms. She said, okay, we haven't done that, but let's try it. And so we picked out some celebrities who we thought would resonate. We quickly had them record videos. This is all within a couple of days. We get the videos in, and a celebrity who I will not name had sent a video that was maybe just not entirely with it. And yet she was saying what we wanted her to say, just in a very weird way. Probably on some sort of, under some sort of influence.
She was high.
Yes. And I looked at it, and everybody's like, we can't run that. But I was like, here's a very famous celebrity. Nobody has seen celebrities in their feed yet. This is not a thing that you're used to seeing a celebrity like this talking. And she's been under the radar for a while. Let's just try it. And we put it on there, and it just took off. And it was scary because there's also brand worries about this, right? What is your brand affiliated with? And we watched those comments. I had people stay up all night on my team. I took shifts to make sure the comments didn't veer into bad about us, but they held, and we got something like a month's worth of revenue in a couple of days from that, and then immediately stopped working, right? And so it was one of those things of, but to do that, right, and to keep pouring gas on it, and also to walk that line as a brand of what are we up for doing here that we think doesn't detract. That was a full executive team decision, right? And I would keep checking in. I would send updates every few hours. Here's what it's doing. Here's what the comments are like. You can have a view of it. So I don't know if that's the weirdest thing I've ever done.
It's awesome.
But there's a lot of that, and just taking the bet and watching and trying it early. And by the way, the Cameo for Business, I don't even think exists anymore. And it stopped really performing 2 or 3 weeks later. It felt like everybody got on for a month.
We tried it. We spent $25,000, had 5 celebrities talking about Homie, and it didn't really work.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like a zero, but there was no positive ROAS.
Yeah, it's so funny how it works, both different for each company and then also timing. Like,
Timing. First one there.
Get there first.
That's amazing.
Very interested in this information. At a high level, can you give us some idea on the top 3 or 4 channels in your BAUs?
Yeah,
Facebook,
and
whatever,
yes, totally. And I don't have a good understanding of who here is at what I would call B2C. Actually, let's just ask, who here is B2C companies? Okay, so a good amount. Awesome. And you,
And
great.
the rest B2B and services?
Okay. And
Boring.
I ask that because this is very much of a your mileage may vary type of thing, but I think there is some key distinctions between B2C and B2B. I think the channels we all know, you can do great stuff on the Meta platforms for consumer. But what I'm finding is that almost all channels now you can buy in what I would call a programmatic way, which means you put money in, you kind of know the outcome, you get tracking, you're buying in small chunks, not $100,000 up front that you never see. I mean, even TV now, you essentially can buy in programmatic chunks on smart TV, connected TV devices. And so, if I just go down a couple of channels that I think are generally interesting, influencers on all platforms, especially with tracking capabilities. Shout out to Ben Labs, which is a company somewhat based here in Utah, who does really, really unique things with influencer marketing and getting that out there. And tell them Rachel sent you. I keep sending, but they're great. I worked with them for many, many years. So influencers on all channels. For some companies, things like Google AdWords, YouTube, the whole kind of Google platform can be really effective. Again, it's kind of trying your strategy. TikTok is interesting these days. Streaming? Yeah, like TV streaming. Yeah, I think that is a very interesting market right now. And even though it seems like it is old-fashioned, there's a lot happening very quickly in streaming, connected TV, Hulu, and you can get really, really granular levels of targeting and attribution. Also, Roku is doing some interesting things these days. So I think everything in TV is definitely worth dabbling in and trying a strategy there. Billboards, we always have a love-hate relationship with billboards. But yeah, then you can just kind of go down. And I would also just look out into your world. If you want a framework, it's, first of all, who is your target customer? And maybe that's you, and that's great. And if not, really get to understand them. And what are they engaging with on a daily basis when they are in the mood to think about your product? And I add that because that is not always 24 hours a day that they would actually be thinking about your product. Honestly, if somebody's sending me some sort of like software ad at 10 p.m. in the evening, I'm like, I'm turned off. I don't want to think about this right now. That's not my mode. But really understanding your customer, and then where are they spending time and attention, and where are their eyeballs going? And those end up being the strategies and the channels that I find most interesting. So whether it's you or someone else, and looking at everything I would also say direct mail. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening in direct mail with, again, more granular targeting, better pricing.
Yeah,
You can do a lot there.
Yeah, sometimes some of you probably do some traditional advertising and marketing, and some of you are probably all online. But it is interesting to see the cycles, right? Where people are like, oh, no one's watching television anymore, direct mail, everyone just throws that in the trash. And then the cost online becomes so high, right? Because all the dollars flooded online, the last decade. And all of a sudden, like my CPMs for a Google ad are higher than a billboard by 5x, right? It costs me 5 times more to get someone to see a Google ad as it does to reach someone with a 14 by 48 vinyl billboard on I-15. And then you just ask yourself, wait a second, maybe billboards aren't a bad buy when you're thinking about awareness and top of funnel. And that's not the case for all brands, but it is interesting. And so like direct mail, we tried direct mail as part of our experimental budget. Ours was about 20% because my CFO was tighter than yours. But you had probably better gross margin than I had. But the reality is we would spend about 20 to 25% in experiments, and we tried direct mail 3 different times. And we just couldn't get it to yield, but we know that it yielded for some of our other competitors. So when something doesn't work, Rachel, why? Like, what are the questions you ask yourself in a channel? And this is great for CFOs because I think that it's easy to like be kind of whiplash your marketing team by saying, hey, you spent 50,000 here, it didn't work, stop it.
Yeah.
Right? So what questions do you ask if something's not working?
So I think first and foremost, get all your data. And I think establishing a rhythm of return and report for everything helps this a lot, right? Every campaign, every experiment, there's a return and report, and whoever ran it kind of gets in the habit of doing that. Because that way you're also not just highlighting the failures. It's just like a very regular thing. Every week we see a return and report of whatever's come across our data. And then you're really looking at what did it cost, what did it drive, looking at whatever kind of the creative or the hook or the activation or the positioning was, just as a gut check of, wait, did we just do the wrong messaging here? Is that something we want to think about right now? Also looking at any other things of note, right? Did we end up doing it just a weird time, right? We didn't realize that it was, NBA Final Four and we were on the wrong channel, right? It's just like double checking all of it. But then I think after that, so you're doing it, you're closing it out. My team just literally had an ongoing deck where we'd put it in, we'd talk about it, we'd take it to the exec team, and it's just return a report on this, return a report on that, return a report on XYZ. But then I think something to note is, should we come back and revisit this data? And many times, what you'll see is that sometimes cohorts or initiatives, if you let them alone for 6 months, they may shake out differently. And so maybe those direct mail customers didn't convert right away. But when we look at them 6 months later, say after a key event like a holiday or something like that, we go back and check the numbers, and sometimes you go, whoa, that looks better than I thought after 6 months. Or maybe they came in and they bought kind of a low cost product, and their AOV wasn't great. They didn't look like a good customer. But you go back and check them 9 months later, and it turns out, well, they came back every month, and they turned out to be a great customer. So I would just say kind of knowing when to come back to things and check them again. And that can just be as a marketer or team. It's not everybody has to do that, but you'll find a lot of interesting things that way. But I think just getting in the motion of a return and report and a postmortem.
I love that. And sometimes we did pre-mortems. Where we would talk about what could go wrong. If this channel doesn't work, why is it? And we would always say it's either because we didn't spend enough. Like if you peanut buttered around too much, sometimes channels need time or more money. Sometimes it was creative or content. It was the wrong creative for the audience, right? And oftentimes it was the channel. It was just the wrong channel. Maybe it was great creative. We spent enough to really test the efficacy of the channel, but in the end, billboards didn't work or direct mail didn't work.
Building on that for a quick moment, and then we'll come to you. I think great that you mentioned pre-mortem. Another thing, and this came from Nate Quigley, the CEO at Chatbooks, we would get these cool partnership things or really like fun channels that seem like, wow, Verizon will tell every single one of their customers about us. That seems like a great deal. We have to do it. And we quickly got in the habit of doing a what do you have to believe analysis. I love all these long acronyms here. But it's simply a spreadsheet where you basically pre-make the funnel of everything that will have to happen, right? Let's say we get 100 million eyeballs. Let's assume, given our best data of what we see, 0.1% click. They take the free trial. How many people from a free trial are going to convert to being a paying customer? Of those, how many are going to be a good customer? And a lot of times you run through that whole analysis, you gut check your assumptions, you go, this is not going to work. And it's sobering because a lot of times those things that are not going to work are really cool. But that helps on the front end.
This is such a good recommendation. If you're not doing this for every new marketing investment, you should. You should ask your CMO, I need to see a business case. I need to see the assumptions from cost per lead to the conversion rate, on the traffic that hits the website to like what the eventual cost of acquisition is. If you go through that funnel in advance, the other thing it allows you to do is to return and report with where you missed. Maybe there wasn't enough traffic, cost per unique visitor was too high, could be the cost per lead was too high, could be that none of them converted, that you had plenty of traffic and plenty of leads and they were all garbage. And then you know where your assumption was wrong. So the next time you go to test a similar channel, you pull up your post-mortem now, right? And you said, okay, these were the assumptions we made. We had a similar channel or a similar partner. What happened? And you're not just repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Ask for a business case. Ask for this pre-mortem or this what'd you call it?
What do you have to believe?
What do you have to believe in order to make this investment? Do that analysis every time you make a marketing investment, big or small. It will train your marketers, who are not always oriented around this kind of scientific method, to really think through the investment and whether or not there's a clear business case. Because the other thing is there's limited resources in marketing, and there's 1,000 different channels and ideas. Right? Like we feel like order takers sometimes as marketing leaders, because everyone's like, oh, we should do this, we should do that, we should do this, we got this partnership and that partnership. And we have to have some type of a criteria, a filter to say we're going to do this and we're not going to do this. And this, what do you need to believe, is another filter criteria. Is it better than the other channels that we're exploring or evaluating?
And it just lets you know when you're doing those postmortems, to your point, of when to really put something to bed, and also helps you with, say, like pet projects, right? Or people have a vision that something is going to work, and including your market. I mean, everybody has a vision, right? And that's where you can pull that back and say, sorry about this data, but.
So let's take 5 minutes for questions before we wrap up. Is that good for you?
I saw we had a question back here.
Yeah, we had a couple questions. Go ahead. Actually, can you tell us what company you're from? Oh, cool.
Oh, awesome.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
What a great brand. Yeah. Oh, great. Still a great brand.
Hi, yes. Yeah. I think it is case by case for me, and it's really how big was the initiative, how expensive was it? If I'm running a small campaign, it's mostly for existing customers. That may just be marketing team or even kind of campaign leads. If it is a big initiative with a lot of dollars or times or resources, usually, to Joe's point, people have been brought in ahead of time with kind of a business case. What do you have to believe? And then let's return and report afterwards. So it probably just where it fits on the scale of how big it is.
I would say be more involved if you have the question, right? I think to the original point of like the best CMOs work with their finance teams really regularly. Like I think that sounds like a great partnership. If you totally trust your marketers and you have business as usual channels, you probably don't need to check in on all that. But when it comes to experimentation, those are big swings sometimes. They're big swings for the positive or for the negative.
Yeah. So Joe kind of alluded to multi-touch attribution. By the way, if you want, I've written a whole long Medium post breaking it all down step by step. If you search my name, it'll probably come up, or I can send it to you. Anyways, I did a really technical piece on this just because I got asked about it a lot. But yes, I would say if you want, depending on where you are in the evolution of the business and what you want to track and how, I would say how strong is your data and analytics team as well. But if you can do one thing, you can turn on a post-purchase survey in 24 hours. But what ultimately, as you scale, is very helpful is multi-touch attribution, where you're taking all the potential information you have about any customer. So they may have answered your survey, so you know, they said that they came from this. And maybe you can tie it to their actual customer data of when they've been served a Google ad or something like that. And so then you can just have a model where you're looking at all those and kind of giving a certain amount of weight to various touch points that they had. And then the post-purchase survey answer just becomes one of those touch points that you add into it.
Yeah, this is, I mean, like I said, I do think it's more than a 60-second discussion, but you answered it really well. I think what we did was we took the question, how you heard about the business, right? And you have to be careful even with that question. How you heard about the business, sometimes we found lent itself to mediums that like TV and radio, right? When maybe they saw or learned about the business. So like I always thought that how you learned about a business was actually a better question than how you heard about a business, because not all, you don't always hear about a business. Like when you say how you heard about a business, sometimes people are like, oh yeah, my friend. But that's not when they first learned about the business, right? And so like think about that question. We use that primarily for our first touch, right? Because we just found it most reliable. And then we use post-purchase for kind of steps 2 through 7. And then for last touch, that was primarily online for us. So most of the last touch was easy because it was, email, or it could have been social ads or a Google ad. So we built a model with all of those inputs, and we could basically say, hey, we want to evenly weight every touch point, or we could weight the first and last touch, which I typically did. And so there's a lot of ways to slice this. I can't wait to read your article, though. That's smart.
Yeah, it's high level. But what I would say is, if you don't have a full attribution model, start with a post-purchase survey. That'll get you pretty far down the road.
For sure.
And then you can layer in all these other things.
Because it's all assumption-driven math at the end of the day, right? So just trust your marketing team. Don't ask questions, okay? We're smart for a reason. You hired us for a reason. Come on, you don't understand, all right? Just let us do our thing. You just increase our budgets, and then you'll get more growth. Stop complaining. Just say thank you. I'm sorry. I can help. So, I was joking earlier that I spent 7 years in finance, and where I actually did accounting. Is that crazy? I know. Abby laughs. So I must have been a really bad accountant, or at least a creative one, right? Must have been a really creative accountant. But I do think that the times where we found the greatest success is when finance understands that we understand, like we're speaking the same language. They're holding us accountable in constructive ways, not with suspicion and questioning everything we do. And we're accountable to a golden goal or to a metric, right? We're accountable to a metric that cannot be spun, right? That is not a vanity metric, right? That everyone can see, this is how many customers you helped acquire. This is the cost of acquiring those customers, and this is what our lifetime value of those customers are. So I know. Does that make sense? That's like the most simple thing. And if your CMOs aren't speaking that language yet, then teach them. Bring them in and say, this is our expectation. This is how we want you to report back to us. And how they do their work matters less than the result that they drive.
Hear, hear.
Okay, other questions? One more question? Oh, never mind. Negative 58. So I guess, Courtney, one more question.
So something I found to be very, very effective was having a company North Star goal for the year and having that North Star goal tied to an all-company bonus, essentially an incentive compensation plan. And I say that because it works spectacularly well of saying we're all on the same page. We all care about these numbers because ultimately we're all trying to get to this growth and hit our bonus, and that's great for everybody. And so I know that you can't just go magically put that in, but I would say I think having that, knowing what the ultimate financial goal is, whether that's a revenue or an EBITDA or whatever that is for your company or a customer acquired number. And by the way, I was chatting with Joe earlier, you may get that number wrong and then your company learns or that metric wrong, but at least if you're all driving towards one thing, because I think that's what it's all in pursuit of how can we look at what's coming in the door, how we're thinking about deploying our resources, and making sure that's getting us towards the goal that we all want to hit. And so that's kind of an existential, yeah.
Sure.
Watching exec teams work together. Something that I've seen work really well and takes the finger pointing out of it is to do these postmortems, but call them retrospectives, and do them regardless of the outcome, because then it creates a safer space.
I like it. Renaming it and then doing it.
Whether it's good or bad.
Right. Because postmortems infers that it didn't work.
When executives are put in the room, it's I'm not just here to talk about things that went wrong. It's just sort of normal practice.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Rachel, so much. Isn't Rachel
Thanks,
brilliant?
Joe.
And it's so nice.
Also,
to
Joe,
have her.
great, all fun together.
So thank you so much for attending. You've been terrific. I think we have our last keynote and then some raffle prizes. You guys check those out? Okay. That is your next priority.
Race.
Solve for CAC to LTV and get as many tickets as you can.